And we're live.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Session 5 of the free online course in DML Commons Program Evaluation for Connected Learning. This is a course where you can gain practical experience in the process of educational program evaluation by exploring real-world problems brought forth by youth-serving programs acting as case studies. My name is Bill Penuel, and I'm a faculty member in the Learning Sciences program in the School of Education at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I am the host for this course. Today's guests come from Composing Our World team. The Composing Our World project is an effort that is engaged in collaboratively designing a year-long project-based curriculum for ninth graders in English language arts, and it is funded by the George Lucas Educational Foundation. And from this team, I'm fortunate to be joined by three members of that team. Co-principal investigator for the project, Joe Pullman. Joe is the Associate Dean for Research in the School of Education here at CU Boulder, and he's a professor of Learning Sciences and Human Development and Curriculum and Instruction here. Dr. Pullman is interested in how people learn science and history through inquiry and with the support of technology, both in community-based out-of-school programs and in schools. And he's one of the principal investigators of the Composing Our World project. Bud Hunt is the IT and Technical Services Manager for the Clearview Library District in Northern Colorado. Before joining the library, Bud was an instructional technologist for the St. Vrain Valley School District. He has extensive experience in both pedagogy and technical systems, and he helps build bridges between the educational and technological sides of educational institutions. Bud advises others across the country on the thoughtful implementation of technology to support teaching and learning, and he's a teacher consultant with the Colorado State University Writing Project, an affiliate of the National Writing Project, and that's a group that will be with us next time. And he's part of the leadership team of the Composing Our World project. Becca Kaplan, my third guest for today, is a doctoral student here in the Learning Sciences and Human Development program. A former middle and high school English teacher, she currently teaches for the Invest Community Leadership Program at CU and engages in various youth participatory action research projects concerning educational inequity. She is the School of Education's lead graduate teacher with the Graduate Teacher Program here. Her interests include teacher learning, anti-oppressive pedagogy, queering literacy, and participatory action research. She works with researchers and teachers to design innovative project-based curriculum for high school students on this project, Compose Our World. So thanks to each of you for being here today. Before I begin to interview them about their work, I'd like to say a little bit about the importance of implementation evidence in evaluation. And a reminder to everyone who's watching here too, you can use the hashtag CLEval to pose questions on Twitter or use the chat feature where you're watching this live broadcast. I hope you'll pose questions of our guests today and in future sessions that I can ask them to answer. Also want to invite people who are watching either live or the recorded version to check out the survey for this evaluation course. It's good in an evaluation course to participate in the evaluation. We'll be tweeting that link out, and it's also on the forum for the course. So a little bit about developing and using implementation evaluation evidence. So one thing that is true about the implementation of any program is that implementation always varies across sites of a particular program. There are lots of new exciting ways that people are using and trying out today for how to actually trace what's happening in classrooms. Whether it's using available data online about how people are participating in online environments, or developing what some teams are calling practical measures of evaluation that can be filled out by students at the end of every class. I hope that what you will take from this is you'll see some ways that you can develop measures of implementation for your particular program. And those measures will be really important for any program evaluation in helping to explain variation in outcomes. More than any other source of or reason why outcomes vary for a particular program is how it was implemented. And so good measures can really help you figure out the story behind what is explaining that variation. So what are some different ways that people can go about thinking about implementation. Probably the most common way that people approach implementation is to look at implementation fidelity or integrity. And both of these are really approaches that look at whether people in programs, whether they're teachers or informal educators, are implementing programs as designers intended. Really, a lot of times, fidelity analysis focuses on the active ingredients of a program. So designers have some ideas about what are the really critical components about a program to be implemented. And so implementation fidelity tries to say, well, whether those things, looks at whether those things were in fact implemented or not. Other folks look at adaptation and how people modify particular programs through implementation. Some of them will argue that all implementation involves adaptation or modification, that there's no such thing as fidelity. So really the task of the implementation evaluation is to figure out and describe the different ways that people are modifying the program, sometimes for the better, to improve it. A third approach might be called actor-oriented. So an actor-oriented approach asks the question of why people make the modifications that they do. So it begins with this premise that, hey, adaptation is real, and it's not just enough to understand how people are modifying it, but if we really want to improve our program, we need to understand the motivations and the reasons of the actors who are making those modifications for doing so. There might be good reasons, and some of the modifications may make the program better, some of them may actually make the program less effective, but only by understanding the how and the why together can we actually improve programs. So those are three broad perspectives people generally bring to this task. In terms of how people go about measuring implementation, there's lots of different sources of implementation data. One common approach is to actually go out and observe. And especially when people are familiar with program designs, like the designers themselves, they can really get a sense of whether the programs are being implemented as intended. But they can also get a real appreciation for how the local context, how the particular students in the room and the flow of activities is unfolding in ways that require somebody who's implementing a program to modify it. Another approach to measuring implementation is through interviews and surveys. About the best and maybe even only way you can understand the why of why people modify programs is to interview them, get a sense of their motives, their reasons, the decisions that they're making, and the basis for them. Surveys can also be a really efficient way, if you can't be in all classrooms all the time, to actually get a sense of what people are implementing, and even to a certain degree how they're actually modifying them. A really exciting new approach, and this team is trying this out, and the example from the readings is an example of this, are something called practical measures. Practical measures are associated with improvement science methodology, and they are tools that are intended to be practical to implement on an everyday basis. They typically have only a few items at a time, and as in the example that's included in the readings for this week, what that particular example did is that students were engaged in a project-based science curriculum, and at the end of every class, they completed a 3-minute survey that asked them basically how they felt about the lesson that day. It asked them to endorse certain emotions they might have felt. And that information has been used by that particular team to help them understand the degree to which the curriculum was helping meet the goals of promoting student agency and interest in the science classroom. So that's something we may hear a little bit about. The team today is using some of these measures. When you go to coming up with these measures, one thing that is really critical to consider is what is it that differentiates your program from everyday practice? Because that's what is going to likely differentiate the program in terms of its impact, especially if you were to have a comparison group design in your evaluation. So let's say your program is all about promoting more student discourse in class. Well, it turns out right now there's a lot of emphasis in a lot of different programs on promoting broader student participation and discourse in class. So you have to focus on what are the key differentiators of your program if you want to be able to tease apart what might be unique about your program that might provide an added benefit in terms of student learning outcomes. And another reason to focus on that is that that's also, that differentiator is likely to be where people have the hardest time implementing this because it's new. So it's the way that it's one place you're likely to see the most variation in implementation is precisely the stuff that you're doing that's new, that differentiates you from everyday practice. So it's a good place to start for that reason. The other thing is, okay, you got all this variation in implementation. You ought to have some theories about, okay, if I've got these differentiators, what's going to be hard about this for teachers and why? So you need to think about measuring also what are going to explain the variation in implementation. Is it how teachers participated in professional development? Is it their supportive school climate? Is it the support of their leadership? Beginning to generate some theories about that gives you some clues about the things that you're going to need to measure, not just to explain, not just to give an account of how implementation varies, but also to be able to explain why it varies. All of this is really useful to building an evaluative argument. We've stressed throughout this course how evaluation is a form of argument. It's about building up claims and being able to support them with a variety of evidence. And so these are key sources of evidence with respect to your particular argument. If you tackle the approach in the ways that we're going to talk about today, you'll be able to support your claims about outcomes in terms of explaining them in terms of variation and implementation, and also to be able to further explain variation in that implementation. And I think that sort of data is exactly how you make evaluation useful for improving programs. And I think it'll help make visible a lot of the different perspectives that people have, the more varied the evidence that you have on particular programs. And it looks like we've lost Bud temporarily, so hopefully he will be able to join us back in a few minutes, because I have a few targeted questions at the beginning for him that we'll hope that he'll be able to join. So let's hear from Joe and Becca while we're waiting a little bit about, just give us some background on the Composing Our World project. Tell us what you're developing and how you're going about it.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start. So we are working on building a project-based curriculum or kind of ecology for teachers to use for ninth grade language arts. The idea is that we're going to build 4 units that potentially would be used together to create a year-long curriculum, and that curriculum is primarily focused on project-based learning, doing real-world, authentic teamwork that is based on a challenge that the curriculum will set and the students can take on. And we will be doing this. But are you back on? And Joe, do you want to pick up? Sorry, everyone. My team. I was wanting to let the team come in. So that's what we're building. We're building these 4 units. We're building them with teachers. We're trying them out with teachers in their classrooms and getting feedback from their students and from them. And we're going to see how this works. The idea is that Lucas Education Foundation wants these project-based curricular units to be open source and usable for people in all different contexts. So we're really excited about it. if you all can hear me, I just want to let you know we're having technical difficulties and we're trying to figure out how to get all of our team back on. So we're working on it right now.
So I think Google is having a fun day, but I'm not sure if my audio is coming through or not.
It
yeah?
is.
Oh, awesome. And there you are. Perfect.
And I'm
Yeah.
me now. Great.
How about
Internet came back.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Suddenly we're working.
Hi, Internet. How's it going?
Okay.
All right.
So shall I try to just
Yeah,
talk
pick
a
up
little bit
with
more
a little
to
bit
that?
on. Yeah,
What
pick
we-
up a little bit more on composing our world, and then we'll ask Bud to talk a little bit about it as an example of connected learning, if he didn't already talk.
Right. So in addition to trying to create a project-based curriculum and resources to support that, that goes across the full year and incorporates social and emotional learning and principles of universal design for learning, we're trying to also create a set of processes and products that will support professional development with work with teachers as we go along. So we like to say what we're trying to develop is an entire ecosystem of curricular resources, people, and products that support highly engaged project-based learning. And we're in the middle of our first year, or near the end of our first year, we started working in co-design teams with teachers and university-based folks and Bud at the library over this past year, and developed initial versions of 4 project unit experiences and are piloting them now, and will then be refining them in the coming summer and so on and so forth. And we'll talk a little bit more, I think, maybe about the refinement process as we go along.
Yeah, and to sort of couch this in connected learning, I think that you mentioned me at the library. When we started this work, I was working for a school district. I've always been interested in the school and the learning that happens at the fringes of an institution and how it relates to others. And I think that's very much what connected learning is interested in, both from a learning and a design point of view. So this notion that we want to really explore how we can engage kids in their interests, I think speaks to connected learning, as well as the fact that we want to situate their interests in that academic experience, but also we want to design these experiences in open ways. And one of our sort of our 6, I keep calling them the big 6, one of the principles that we think is really important to our work is also one of the big 6 of connected learning, which is production centered. We want media making to happen. We want kids to make things to demonstrate their learning. We want that to happen across the projects and the units. So to me, this really feels like an attempt to make a connected learning ecosystem, as Joe called it, in a ninth grade English classroom, and to figure out what that looks like across different districts and contexts.
It strikes me too, but that it's also a good example of an interest-powered, kind of learning environments that we're setting up. Is that, you agree?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I hope so. One of the tensions in the work is figuring out when it makes sense for the teacher to suggest the interest and the purpose, and when it makes sense for the student. And that's also, by the way, a tension for the researchers and the classroom folks as well, is when do we lean in, when do we back up? So I think that there's a lot of room to help kids and grown-ups scratch their intellectual itches and interests in this work.
That's great. So you mentioned teachers, and I'm wondering if you guys could speak to who are the range of stakeholders in this project. And in the class, we've really been focusing on identifying the variety of stakeholders for evaluation, because often stakeholders have some different purposes and goals. So tell us a little bit about who those stakeholders are and what their goals for the project are.
So I'll just give you like a quick laundry list. There's the teachers in the classroom, there's the students that they serve, there are the districts that we are working with in this work, there are the outside experts that we'd like to engage when it makes sense, and then as far as sort of an interesting one that has been a challenge is figuring out at those district levels what the interests are of the districts and learning organizations in fiddling with their content and curriculum, and what are the interests of the classroom teachers, and how do all those things intersect and overlap, while trying to make a big push that students should get a little more say in what happens to them in those situations. And then we've also got all of the different researchers and folks on this project who come to this work for a variety of reasons, and we've been unpacking that and figuring out where that lives.
And I'll just add that it's the researchers are housed at several different institutions. We've got folks from University of Colorado Boulder. I'm in learning sciences. Bridget Dalton is in literacy studies, and then we've got Antero Garcia from literacy at Colorado State. We've also been collaborating with an organization called CAST, which is a nonprofit educational institution that does work on universal design for learning. So those folks are involved. And it's also worth pointing out that an important and engaged stakeholder that isn't always engaged in some projects like this is the funder. Lucas Education Research is a hands-on, highly engaged, and very knowledgeable set of folks, from our program officer for our particular program to the institution as a whole, about these issues. And then we also have, I didn't mention everybody from our team. We've got a faculty member in educational equity and cultural diversity, Allison Boardman, who is our project director on this project, and she couldn't be here for this phone call today. And then we've got a large crew, currently 6 doctoral students, and Becca is representing that group here today. I think that's just about everybody.
What are some of the tensions that you have experienced in terms of the research and funder team goals on the one hand, say, and the teachers who are participating? And if not tensions, just differences.
Let's see.
I would say that this is a general thing, but as you move away from the classroom, right, as you move from I am a classroom teacher and these are the 120 students that I interact with daily, to I am thinking about a 5-year plan for our learning organization, there's a lot of difference in terms of experience, and I think that a lot of the practical considerations at this level, and I'm sorry to do it as a vertical because I don't think that's fair, but the practical classroom considerations are sometimes in conflict with the long-term goals, and I think that's a tension. I think as we've looked across districts, there are different expectations for what happens in that same sort of 9th grade experience. So even the teachers would have some tension at that level. And then each of the research team members that I've enjoyed working with come at this from different lenses and different experiences, and we've all been to ninth grade, so we all have this baggage about what ninth grade is, what it isn't, what it could be, and what it should be.
And I think there's a tension that we feel around the day-to-day doing and figuring out what we've learned to go forward. So when we're talking with our funders, we always feel pressure, both self-imposed and by questions that they ask about, well, what does what you're doing mean? And that's having our attention on what does it all mean versus what are we going to do tomorrow and next month and so on and so forth. We need to do a back and forth in order to be productive in both senses.
Yeah, I would just add that one thing that comes up is that we're looking at, from the funder's perspective, creating an open source resource that anyone can use, and so we really want to be able to design multiple pathways so that people can make this stuff work in their classrooms regardless of the constraints and affordances of their context, which we know vary so much from school to school and from classroom to classroom. But when it comes to our teachers that are trying this out now, it really needs to work for their context and for their constraints and affordances. So I think there's kind of this dual challenge of thinking about how can we make this work today, and then also how can we be thinking about how it can work for many other teachers to come.
Makes me think to ask the team, how are you guys thinking about implementation from this Fidelity perspective, from more of an adaptation perspective or an actor-oriented perspective? How are you thinking about it?
I said this to Joe and Becca earlier. I'm interested. I'm lazy, first of all, so I'm interested in what is the minimum viable composing our world experience, right? What are the raw materials that you have to have so that we can ignore all the other stuff, so that it's it's an experience that can be great for the kid and the teacher, and that can happen in other ways. And then once you have those minimum viable pieces, what is the minimum viable infrastructure you need to support, sustain, broadcast, and share, and to create that ecosystem that Joe talked about? That's what I think about, and we're in the middle of getting it right while we're designing it and it's being implemented. And then I'm pretty sure that everything that we're doing right now has little bits of awesome in it, but we're going to abandon 95% of that and focus on the 5% as we move forward.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just add that in my prior work, I've focused on a sort of adaptation framework, and I'm trying to move more to that fully dynamic, understand what happened, what were the variations, how and why, so that we can really build a better understanding of, as Becca talked about, how this can work in multiple contexts for people in very different situations. And I think it's only understanding the variations that we deliberately engender and welcome in our early to medium scale work in order to help us facilitate going to a broader scale as we go across in time.
One thing I want to add about that is thinking about the goals of project-based learning, of what we're designing for the students, I think really fit with how we're thinking about designing it for the teachers. So just like when we set a challenge for our students and we want them to break up in teams and really follow their intuitions and their interests to learn about that challenge and to grow, I think we want that for teachers as well. And so we don't want to be so stuck on what is right or wrong. We want to be really encouraging people to push their own limits of what they think they can do in their classroom and they can support their students in doing in their classroom. And to me, the kind of Fidelity framework when I was a teacher didn't support people in pushing forward and expanding their horizons. So I think that we're trying to use those latter frameworks that Bill brought up.
Can you say a little bit more about that, Becca? Like, when you were being the person being told to implement something with Fidelity, it didn't push you forward? How come?
Well, because Fidelity makes you feel a little bit in the box and maybe a little bit handcuffed to a specific way of doing things that perhaps wasn't designed for your context and your real students and your real constraints. So I think that's something that makes me really excited about this project and this team, is that that's not what we're doing. We're not saying that this is the way to do it and you have to do it like this. We're saying how can we support you in shifting your classroom and unschooling the way that you teach and interact with your students.
And I know because each of you is working in one of the design teams, you have probably some sense of what the teachers that you're working with hope to get out of their participation. So, thinking about this actor-oriented perspective, what is this project to them? Why are they doing it? Can you speculate a little bit about that?
I think that teachers are coming at it from different perspectives and for different reasons. But some of the teachers that we're working with on our team, I think, are really wanting to try something new. They've been teaching for a long time, and they're creative, engaging, wonderful teachers. And they're thinking, yeah, I want to try something different, and I want to talk to other teachers in other schools and researchers in other kinds of environments who are thinking about different things than I am, and about what we can do to make school more interesting, more engaging, and more authentic for our students' lives. So it feels like that's part of it, is teachers who want to try something different. I think that there's something really great about teachers working in knowledge production. The people who are in classrooms every day should be a part of the feedback loop of what we're learning about what teachers need and want and can do.
I just want to echo what Becca just said, which is that I think a lot of times school happens to teachers as much as it happens to kids. And when I went out to recruit some of the teachers that I wanted in on this project, I was thinking about teachers who have things happening that I would love to see amplified, and I approached it with them as a professional development opportunity, but also as an opportunity for them to have that amplification, to get their voice, their practice, their habits beyond their classroom, because I thought it would benefit kids. And I think that frame of professional growth, but also that frame of sharing beyond my classroom, that giving back to the profession piece is a piece of it for some. I will also say that in this particular instance, the funding, the funder's name carries a lot of baggage, so everybody's hoping that, well, it's just delightful.
I'll just add one thing. In addition to the engagement of being in a community of other educators, which I think is really motivating to a significant subgroup of our participating teachers, I think there's an appeal in the promise of project-based learning that many teachers over the years feel like they have a sense of, but working on it together with other teachers and researchers who can help them reflect on their process might help them fulfill this promising approach that they know reaching that promise hasn't been exactly achievable to them yet so far.
And not to glom it on, but I also say that one of the language arts coordinators who's involved in this project, so a district level teacher, a teacher of teachers, feels like that their school really has, or their district really has, this great framework for teachers in terms of the big picture of curriculum, but they're really interested in helping teachers move beyond that box, right? So the district is saying and expressing, like, we want school to feel less like school, and we want some help helping our teachers to do that, which I think is it's a wonderful thing for a learning organization to say, but it's neat to watch that be a stated desire for teachers in a school district.
So I know your funding partner, the Lucas Education Research, is really interested in developing high-quality evidence for the effectiveness of PBL, and in fact, that's what their partnerships are really investing in to do. And so I'm wondering what you guys are thinking about. How will you go about evaluating the effectiveness of what you are producing? What's your plan in that regard?
I can start with what we built into the proposal in terms of phasing across time. The basic idea is that we'll start with intensive co-design work with researchers and teachers and do an insane amount of documentation of that as we go along and try to gain an understanding of what's working, how and why in a more sort of qualitative analysis sense in the first year and a half. So during this pilot phase, we're documenting what's going on and trying to make sense of it, and also we're doing processes that help us create the measures that will be some of our efficacy measures as we go along. And then next year we'll be doing a kind of design-based implementation research that is still very design-oriented, where we're putting these things together and still collecting a lot of qualitative data, but still developing the outcome measures. And then, and in both those years, we're conducting these collaborative design institutes and co-design processes with teachers. And then we're going to try to scale out in the final year, doing a small-scale efficacy study that uses a quasi-experimental approach. And Allison Boardman on our team is a real expert in doing this kind of work. She's done it with other curricula in Colorado, and so that's where we'll recruit multiple schools, and we'll create matched pairs of implementation schools where teachers will participate in a more adaptation with smaller scale co-design kind of institute and professional development process that's based on our experiences over the first year and a half or two. And then we'll also have outcome measures that relate to, that use pre and post assessments, and as well as implementation indicators that we've developed and refined over the first 2 years that we relate to those outcome measures as well. So that's the big picture. And Bill, you might be able to put more flesh on those kinds of ideas if you want to.
I'll leave it to you guys for today for that, but that's a great. And so in the meantime, what are you doing to figure out if you're on track? Because that's a little bit down the road. How do you know that your design process is working as you hope, for example, and producing and working towards producing these project-based units?
Well, can I just say that one of the things I hope we'll see that's an informal measure, but it's one that is the 5% of bits of awesome that I'm hoping that we'll see, is that kids will make things that they say, this was pretty cool that I made this, right? And I hope that those will go beyond the classroom and other people will say, this is pretty cool that you made this. I also hope some of our teachers feel that way too. So that's an impromptu measure for me that I really get excited about, is somebody making a thing that they say, well, this thing should live beyond classroom. I don't throw it in the recycle bin when I walk out of my experience.
And Becca or Joe, do you have thoughts about the interim measures and things that, interim benchmarks, either sort of subjective or as part of the evaluation?
Do you want me to start, or you want to?
I was going to say, one of the things we're looking at right now is getting teachers' reflections, teacher voice, and then student voice around how these first iterations are going. So we have a couple of different kinds of surveys that we're having students fill out that ask them questions like, did what I do today in class matter to me? Do I think it mattered to somebody outside of this class? Do I think it has do I think it will count when I leave this classroom to go to other classrooms, but also in the broader world? We're also asking students about, how they experience emotions during their classes. So we have a social and emotional learning component to this project where we want to be thinking about the affective impact of different kinds of learning and how students are interacting with that. And we're also asking teachers to reflect on what they're trying out and how it's working. I know with a small team of teachers that Joe and I are working with, they're sharing what they're doing throughout the week and journaling on an ongoing Google document so they can talk to each other about how it's working in their different schools and their different classrooms, and then we can interact with those ideas too. Those are just a few of the things. We also have researchers in these classrooms taking field notes and both interacting as kind of traditional researchers, but also participant observers and jumping in and supporting with a bit of co-teaching when it's needed and open and different things like that.
We're also trying to think about ways to get the stuff that ends up in the field notes and in the data buckets out to be talk-aboutable. That's a very scientific phrase. But one of the things that Joe and I were talking about recently with Allison is can we take some of these field notes, these really sort of clinical, like here's what happened, and start to look at them across, but then try to tell stories with them. So make some media ourselves that allow us to think about the fact that some observation is recurring or the same sorts of things are happening across classrooms so that we can be in conversation with ourselves and the teachers and the students involved in this work about what's happening here, what isn't happening here, is what we saw what it felt like to you. Those sorts of ways to stir the pot, shake whatever the metaphor is you want to use, but to be in conversation with ourselves about what's happening as a result of the implementations we're trying.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little story about where we are in the process around those student-facing indicators, these practical measures coming from students at the end of a class about what their experience was related to their emotions and our goals around some of the principles of project-based learning. A key principle is this authentic to me as well as authentic to others and meaningful to others outside of school in a way that is different from sort of standard schooling. This is one of the reasons people do PBL. So we've got these little questions we've begun asking the students, and last Saturday in our all-team meeting with all the teachers and all the researchers, we shared out some of those results from one class and sort of testing out how to represent to the group what's going on, discussed what that means and what we can do with it, and now we're thinking about not only how to share out and make those things actionable and discussable within our group of teachers and researchers, but what can we do with students so that they both get the experience of reflection, which drives their learning and engagement potentially, but also us reflecting back and having their input as we reflect things back to them, feed back into ongoing further design. And I just want to stress that the really most important indicator that we're doing well now is not that students are reaching all the learning and engagement goals already, but rather that we understand enough about what's going on so that we're creating experiences and records of those experiences for ourselves that can inform our redesign and ongoing work. So it's not that we get to the finish line right away. It's that we learn from the race. We need to learn from the process and have it inform our ongoing design work related to both curriculum and professional development and learning community work with teachers and ourselves.
And that speaks to, I think, one of the key goals of design-based implementation research project is that you're learning from the implementation along the way, and that's feeding forward into the iterative designs. Bud mentioned one way that he hopes to see that. And I know that you guys have a lot of different communications media. I'm wondering if you can talk about the ways that you communicate internally and with teachers as one of those vehicles for of ongoing feedback as to progress, and how do they function? How do you hope they function? How do you wish they function but don't now?
It's tricky because we live in a wonderful time when there's all the communications options in the world for people. Also, there's all the options in the world for people. But as you start working across district boundaries and whatnot, you have to deal with firewalls and restrictions and this, that, and other things. So, but also habit. That's the most powerful thing you have to overcome with nerdy communication things. So we're using two tools, trying to use, figuring out how to use, and I'm learning a great deal about this year. We're using Slack as a project management, an internal conversation tool. And I would say that's been mixed. Some of us said, this is great, we'll lean into it and try it out. Others of us said, I'm not gonna do that because that's not email and it frightens me. Or my district will block it, or I don't want to put this on my phone, or whatever. So we're figuring out as a group how to have those internal communications. Actually, I think it's starting to get really delightful because we're able to ping each other through that tool, and if I get a Slack message, 87 of my devices light up, and I know it's like the bat phone. But that's working okay as a private tool. We also seem to be struggling with when do we email versus when do we Slack message things. So sometimes things are going twice. But that's a fun learning process for us as well. On the public side, we're trying to play with a blog, which creates a bunch of different tensions. One is, well, what's blog worthy? Do I blog? And this is something I've been dealing with for like 10 years as a blogger. But when do I tell the internet what's happening here, and when do I not? And what's published, and what's public, and what's formal, and what's informal? And I think we've been a little conservative with that. We're trying to open it up. But I will tell you that at our last meeting, I finally had a teacher who had been saying, you should blog that, you should blog that, you should blog that, say, how do I get on the blog again? So that's starting to be a thing that is emerging as a public habit. I'm still playing with it.
And I'll add that we're using Google Docs quite a bit too, and Carrie put on the hashtag CLEval a link to Bud's post of one of the ways that we're using Google Docs increasingly is to do some collaborative editing. We're a group of English language arts educators. Writing is an important part of what the majority of our community of people do in order to process and learn. And so we started out back in our initial summer institute doing some things where we created not so much a Google, sometimes we do a Google form where we capture something, people respond to the form, and it goes into a spreadsheet. But the really cool opening that we've been doing more and more, that Bud's post on Twitter last week links to, is these create tables and have different groups doing live input and feedback in these collaboratively edited documents. And that post is a time lapse of one particularly successful and dynamic one that we did last Saturday when we were reviewing our where we are with our units. So I wanted to pass that to Becca.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I think we're using these technology tools for both evaluating and also designing on our teams. So for the idea that all of us would be in a Google Doc at once, doing some kind of design sprint where we're making an idea for, say, an opener for a unit, we might all just take 10 minutes and work in the same document at the same time, and then look at after that at like, okay, this is our brainstorm. So I feel like it changes a little bit about how our process has been going in terms of rapid designing, and then it also has changed how we give feedback and how we're evaluating. So the piece that Joe was just talking about, I think that it was really interesting to get into our groups, and we the researchers had already put together a form of different aspects of project-based learning to kind of evaluate ourselves on, and the team discussions about how we think we're doing in terms of these first iterations of our units were really interesting, very, very useful, and they were public, so the other teams could also see how we're evaluating our work, and then could weigh in and give us some ideas and ask us questions in the same document. So there's a lot of additional conversation going on than if these tools weren't being used. And you'll see it in the classrooms too. A lot of our teachers are trying out using back channel discussions while a group might be doing a fishbowl conversation or a Socratic seminar, so that people can be weighing in and giving their opinion even if they're not participating in the verbal discussion. So that's been pretty cool.
Oh, go ahead, Joe.
I just wanted to add that back to what Bud was talking about, all this documentation and these traces of what has gone on in our code design process is really potentially productive both for us and for the field trying to understand how to do implementation research and design all at the same time. But it's very difficult to reduce those things down into accounts or artifacts that can be talked about that show important aspects later on of what's going on. So we need to think about how to create those common representations that are discussable, that show important aspects of what's been going on, and those might be in the form of sort of narrative story accounts of this group did this group did that, this group did the other, and that then it feed and to give the storied account. But then there might be certain things that are numerical metrics that we can put in graphs and so on. But I think one of the things we need to be developing is ways of putting those things together in an interim sense so that we can use them in our work going forward.
That sounds like a great challenge for the people participating in the class to maybe weigh in their thoughts on. And I wanted to highlight, I think, for the participants in the class that this is a great example of how an artifact created by a team, in this case, like the self-evaluation of teams as they undertake their designs and get feedback from each other, that can be a really important source of evaluation evidence. And that it doesn't have to be a whole separate data collection, but can be integrated. And as Joe's saying, then the challenge becomes for you, the evaluator, is how do I develop an account of that? How do I develop some claims from that about how things are going, how implementation of this unit, or in this case, the design process, is going to get us towards the kinds of project-based units that the project is trying to create. So I wonder, since today's theme, just to continue on a little bit, you've shared quite a bit about how you're looking at implementation now. Where are you headed in terms of thinking about what you want to measure for next year even? What are some things that you're going to probably be looking for in classrooms to see teachers doing that are going to give you some clues that they're headed in a direction that you think meets the project goals?
Yeah, I'll start. I think one of the things that's happened in our process is we put together in our initial proposal last spring to summer a set of sort of interlocking principles related to project-based learning, social and emotional learning, and universal design for learning. Things like that I mentioned, like authenticity to me and to outside communities, using real tools, artifacts that go out to the public, as Bud mentioned, and then the social and emotional learning issues related to things like collaboration, which feeds into that, as well as the people's affective responses to things. So one of the things we're trying to get better at this year as we're visiting classrooms and creating field note records is both this combination of creating accounts of what happened with, at the end of our field notes, sort of summarizing some important aspects of what's going on. And to the extent that we can get better and better at linking to some of these key principles that we're both paying attention to in our research records, like field notes, and becoming increasingly salient in our design work in our learning community, that one of the important things is going to be sort of EDIC coding related to those items as they've come to have meaning within the community, and see how they play out. And as I mentioned before, we also need to develop more formal assessment measures related to what we value. And so, for instance, we have an SEL working group that, Becca, I think you're part of that, so you might want to chime in. And we've the SEL community is really struggling with how to create formal measures on some of the things that we value in that arena. So I'll pass it to Becca now.
Yeah, so one of the things I was thinking about with what we'll be looking for next year and what we'll be working on even this summer is that in the initial designs of these project-based learning units, we thought about a concept, an overarching challenge, essential questions. We talked about texts that we would use, and then when teachers started doing these units, I think we started to realize, oh wait, like just because we've talked about these different ideas doesn't mean that the students are going to be engaging in authentic teamwork where they're collaborating to create something that's new and different and relevant. Sometimes that's not the part where students are really collaborating and we're building the structures for them to get to collaborate. That's really tough, and it might be really unusual for different classrooms for different reasons because of the different kinds of restrictions and constructions that are in the classrooms now. So I think what I'm really excited about and something we've talked about is that we'll really get a chance this summer to look back at these units and say, well, what is that final public product that the students are working toward? And how are we building the structures to support them in doing that work the whole time, so that it's not something they just do at the end, or it's not something that we say, okay, you should do this, but we're not really sure how to support you in doing this. So it's something that is woven throughout and really feels different to the students. Something that we're really looking forward to is how can we keep iterating on these so that these units don't feel like normal school. They feel like authentic work for them.
That's great. Thank you for that. So we're at that point in the webinar where I want to ask the team to frame a challenge for members of the class. And for people in the class, you can post your responses to this to the DML forum, and I'll give some more instructions later. But tell us what you're struggling with, what we can help you with as a class in terms of the evaluation.
I guess if I had the opportunity to ask a bunch of evaluators and smart people to help us think through something, one thing I would wonder about is how do you know when the thing that you thought was really important is actually important? And I say that in terms of media. When you take out this thing that you say, I'm really happy this happened, I've seen a lot of folks get really excited about things that really aren't that good. So how do you help people build their sense of here's this stuff that is happening that is significant in a way that actually is significant? And I should probably have a really scholarly way to frame that, but I don't. So I'll just say, how do you know that the thing that you think matters?
And I'll add mine, which Bill correctly sussed out, was I previewed earlier, and that is transforming lots of documentation into interim and sometimes more polished summaries and artifacts so that they don't go into a data and experience black hole. Another way of saying this is we can talk about practical measures, but how do we make the practical measures practical?
And I think that I would just add, so if the thing that you're designing is the curricular unit, But in real classrooms, there are other things that really might feel more present than the actual unit or what the curriculum is. And I think that that often feels like behavior corrections, ideas around discipline, around classroom management. When those are the things that are more at the front than the unit itself, what should researchers do to deal with both of those things at once? Because the goal is to create the unit. It's not to shift people's teaching. But how can we do this kind of unit if our teaching strategies don't lend to it? If our attention is stuck on tests or discipline or behavior?
So such an enduring issue in PBL classrooms, I know, is to think about that. Well, thank you all. I want to invite everyone this week to respond to the questions and challenges posed by our panelists today. That discussion is going to be happening on the forum for the course, and the URL for that is forum.dmlhub.net. You can also continue the conversation from today using the Twitter hashtag CLEval. As much as possible, I'd like you to try something I think will make your contributions helpful to the panelists, so that when you go to post, see if there's an answer that you can build upon or challenge. Rather than starting a new topic or thread, try to actually add to an existing one so we can keep the conversation going and build out a suggestion that panelists can use. Next time, on Monday, March 21st at 10 a.m., we will be with members of the National Writing Project, and we're going to be having two guests who will talk about a large-scale evaluation of an effort there that is being conducted with SRI. So please join me in thanking my guests today from the Composing Our World Project for a really wonderful discussion and persistence through all sorts of technological challenges. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.